Welcome everyone. I'm Vincent Docherty. I'll be moderating this session. By background, I was the co-chair of the two Glasgow WorldCons in 1995 and 2005. I chaired the 2011 Amsterdam SMOFCon, and I'm the co-chair of next year's SMOFCon in Lisbon in Portugal. This is the final organized session of today, apart from in parallel with the virtual con suite. And we're delighted to have a number of people who've been involved in conventions, genre conventions this year, which have had to pivot from a physical to a virtual format. It was very much designed as a kind of pair with the previous session, where we heard the co-chairs of Conzealand speak about their broader experience about that. And the design of this session is to allow each of the participants, who I'll ask to introduce themselves in a second, to deep dive a bit more. So it's a combination of present, but also panel discussion as well. So I want to give them each a bit of time to really talk about that. Okay, and we'll do it in consecutive order because each of the events this year has learned from the previous ones. And then we'll open it up for a broader panel discussion and also get the questions in from the other people attending. So let me just ask, first of all, just each of you to introduce yourselves and, you know, what events were you primarily involved in this year? And then I'll come back to Matt to talk about Balticon, then Randall and Patty to talk about Conzealand, and then Ginny to talk about World Fantasy Con. Okay? So Matt, just a quick introduction first.
I'm Matthew Shogren. I'm known around the convention circuit as Matt the Hats usually, because I'm usually wearing more than one hat at most conventions I'm at. For Balticon, I was head of logistics. Going into when we were deciding to go live, I was head of logistics. I was number 4 in the tech crew. I was head of social media, and there was something else I was too, but and then beyond that, I work tech on shore leave, Conzealand. I'll be doing Farpoint coming up. I helped with NASFIC, Chessie, Phil, a couple others. So I with a lot of them.
So after this session, you might be getting lots of requests from the people attending the event. Very good, Patty and Randall.
I guess I'll start first because Randy's sitting here like this. I'm Patty Wells, and I chaired the Reno WorldCon in 2011, and have chaired a WesterCon and a couple of Oricons. And I'm a long-time con runner, really, really long time. The background that helped me with this was less my con running experience than that I started my career as a crisis counselor. I was a college professor for 20 years. And my daughter Zoe describes me as not a techie, but tech adjacent because I married one and gave birth to one.
Randall.
And I'm Randall Shepherd. I was chair of the 2013 WorldCon. I've had a lot of other fantasy duties. I'm a member of the Alamo board, which has been the sponsor behind all the Texas WorldCons and NASFICs. I was Patty's co-DH in the newly created Platform Services Division for Conzealand, which we'll be talking about during this panel. And I was probably invited onto that because I've been involved in several emergency situations in con running, shall we say.
It's not that you had any last minute emergencies in Texas, of course, but
no.
So Ginny, cheers, and tell us about your own, introduce yourself, yeah?
I'm the newbie of the group. I am not a con runner, or at least I wasn't until a couple of months ago. I have never and never really aspired to run a convention at all, but I really love World Fantasy, and I have for a number of years. And when David Hartwell asked me years ago, he said, "We've never been to Salt Lake. You should put in a bid." And I said, "You know, I'm not a con runner. I wouldn't know how to do it." And he said, "I'll help you. Go ahead." So, and then he died. And then I was stuck. So, but nobody was more shocked than me when they awarded the bid to host World Fantasy in 2020 in Salt Lake City. But, you know, I got into it, and I have a managerial background in the corporate world, and so I thought, hey, I can do this. You know, this is great. It's managing a team. It'll be fun. So I had never done anything before. I then immediately got involved with WesterCon NASFIC in 2019, which was in Logan, Utah, and working with Kate Hatcher, and I ran the registration division and learned a ton from her. And then last year I worked with Bobby and Bruce Farr and Sherry Benown and so on in 2019 at World Fantasy in Los Angeles. And then, you know, then the rest is history. We were running it in Salt Lake, and we pivoted, and we'll talk about that later.
Excellent. So great. So let's just get into the detail of the stories that you each have, starting with Matt. So Balticon, as I understand it, the original one was technically cancelled, and then you created a virtual Balticon for the was it for the Memorial
Day weekend? That is our usual date.
Okay.
So the board, they had started discussing the possibilities of virtual, but it hadn't gotten to the board level when the board got to the point where it had to decide that we weren't doing it in person. So the board canceled it, and the proposal, which was trying to get to the board before the cancellation had to happen, got to the board about a couple days later. And so we officially canceled, announced it, and then I think it was 2 days later announced that we were going virtual. The big thing that was getting worked out before that was, could we go virtual? And the answer was yes, and obviously it was getting everybody that we needed on board with going virtual. Once we did that, I started developing a curriculum to train first the people we're going to need for Zoom hosting and Discord, and that was all of the training was thrown under logistics. I was head of logistics, so that went to me. My day job is video teleconferencing and engineering, so I actually do those for a day job, which gave me an advantage with starting there. I had the first tech trainings running 2 days after we announced we were going virtual. And we were running between 3 and at peak 15 trainings a week for the, we had 58 days to do it. So however many weeks that turned out to be.
Actually, take us back to that starting point. So 58 days, what's that, 2 months, something like that. So, you know, talk us through that probably very difficult period, you know, because we heard that momentarily ago from the Concealant chairs, you know, just how difficult that point was. Can you say more about that, and then take us through in some detail the, you know, as you had begun to do the, you know, the kind of what happened and how it went?
Well, to start with, I was one of the people who, since I do video teleconference engineering, I've actually done virtual cons for businesses before, not during COVID and whatnot. So when it first got brought up, my answer was yes, we can do it, no problem. It was convincing everybody else, at least from my perspective, it was convincing everybody else that we could handle it. And the big holdups were we had to show programming that what we could do, and then show programming that we could train people, because a lot of the panelists that we have are not naturally tech savvy or weren't at the start of this. Nowadays, that's a little different. We've been training them. For the various conventions that we've been doing, I've been running training at least every other week on Zoom and Discord and the various things we use for online conventions. As I said, just about continuously since March. So the first question was, could we do, we had to first admit that we were at a point where we had to cancel the in-person convention, which was a hard sell for some of our board members. And then once that honestly, the board didn't really want to deal with the idea of virtual until they dealt with, no, we really aren't doing it in person. And that was an interesting series of discussions that happened mostly over email and a bunch of Zoom meetings that we threw up to make those discussions. And we pulled it together. Yes, Kathy, not everybody, there's still a lot of non-tech savvy people, but I'm very tinny. Let me switch microphones then. Select microphone. Is that any better for the people complaining? Oh, okay, my audio is fine. Never mind.
Yeah,
okay,
clear to me. So please carry on.
I'll keep going then. Never mind. So yes, Balticon is run by the Baltimore Science Fiction Society. So it was the board of directors for that is who had to make the call. The chair was the one who made the final recommendation and took it to the board for approval. Mike Rafferty was the chair this year. I have to say that of the chairs we've had, he was the right one to be there when this had to happen. There are a number of chairs we've had in the past that do wonderful in person that I wouldn't have wanted to have to explain what it would take to go online in 58 days. But he was one of our more tech savvy people we've had as a con-chair, which made it a lot easier when we turned to let's move it online. And at that point, but yeah, at that point, we took who was available, not who officially had the positions, to start getting things going. And that was a big theme throughout getting it done. Was we had 58 days, which meant there was a lot of we need to make decisions early so we can train people early. Yes, Mike Rafferty is part of Techno Fandom. He's been a TD before in the past. He also built Balticon's registration system. So he's a good one. Sorry, question in the chat. But yeah, so going on, we then, there was basically, from my perspective, I thought there was at least 4 trainings we had to do. We had to do the basic training for Zoom for techs. We had to train people on Discord for techs and moderators. We had to train people on how to do the streaming, and then we had to train the panelists and presenters. We also then needed to make a video to train people on how to use Zoom as the attendees as well, and we offered practice sessions. But yeah, so at that point, the first tech trainings for Zoom were on 2 days after we decided to go virtual. I ended up having to do some editing of the course material in those 58 days, but I was training the first couple of times each one of the new courses that we developed, and then I brought on board Archer and Lalani, who took over a lot of the training with the courses that were more solidified as I was making the last of them. We also brought on Dr. G and a couple of other people who took a couple of those courses, especially on the participant training, because we insisted before they were added onto the schedule, they had to go through one of those trainings, which we also used to make sure that their system could handle it. Um, we ended up with, I think, 12 people who did participant trainings, and I believe 150 participants that went through the training program. 70 plus techs, 150 participants slash panelists slash whatever you want to call them. And we ended up really only with at the end of that, we ended up, most of the participants were good. We actually ended up losing a lot of techs through that process. We trained about 70 of them, but I only had, I think it was 28 or 26 that we actually able to put on the schedule during the convention. Some of it was scheduled, some of it was.
So it's a remarkably short period that you describe. I mean, 58 days, 2 months, basically. Now Balticon, of course, was what, Balticon 54, so it's a repeating event in the same city. I'm assuming that, in a sense, you lifted and shifted many of the existing planned guests and participants to the virtual. So can you say, you know, how did it actually go? What was the experience of it, and what feedback did you get? What were the big learning points that you took from it?
So the big thing we had to start doing is look at our schedule, which is 28 rooms. And we decided we could really only handle 5 at a time, which, you know, 5 simultaneous tracks, 24 hours a day is still a lot of time. And overnight, we actually dropped it down to 2 tracks for most of the evening. But the first big thing was a number of program meetings going, okay, first, which contacting participants for, are you interested and still willing to go online? And second, which items did we think would actually transition well online? And that was a big thing to figure out. The next big hurdle that we ran into after figuring that out was a lot of people had never heard of Zoom in March. I know it's shocking to everybody here, but the number of people that we had to come through and bring on board, there was a lot of training in it. There was a lot of discussions. There was a lot of, okay, we're planning to do it this way, but we might change how we're doing it. And there were a lot of things that initially we thought we were going to do one way. Like originally, we weren't actually going to open the chat at all. We were just going to do Q&A. And we got talked into allowing open chat, but not private messages from a harassment policy perspective, is what we ended up with there. And a lot of, and it was the tech crew came together very quickly. The programming crew came together very quickly. And it was a lot of the tech and the programming and the social media, because our Discord before that was actually under social media, and still is under our social media heads. So a lot of it was bringing the tech. I came at it a lot from the tech side, but then bringing in the participants, getting everybody up to speed. We ran something like 30 or 40 practice sessions where panelists got a chance to practice. Attendees who are interested in practicing and seeing how it would look could join completely free ahead of time. We'd announce them. They were on random topics. We had people throwing random topics. I put them in a sheet and literally rolled dice to pick the topics.
Interesting.
And people were talking on whatever, because the purpose was to show the technology, to learn the technology, to get comfortable with the technology, not spend a lot of time preparing your presentation. And the day came. And the tech crew came together amazingly well. There were a couple of things that I was worried weren't going to be there that were live 10, 15 minutes before they were needed. But and a lot of that was actually on Discord. Robert, who is now the head of tech, was the ATD last year, took over bot construction and finished up the parts that hadn't gotten done yet, because we were getting the people who were available, but we didn't have it. Needed more volunteers than we really had. I ended up putting almost 600 hours in during that time frame to make it happen. And I was lucky to be able to do that because I was telecommuting half of the week, every other week for my job. And when I was telecommuting, they didn't have any work for me to do, so I had to be logged in with my work computer there, and I was over here dealing with Balticon and looking for emails every once in a while. And then one of the big things that we figured we needed was we used Discord for the hallways. We used Discord for gaming a little bit. Our head of gaming was not one of the people we could get on board for moving virtual. So we offered some gaming space, but we didn't have anybody really running it, which means it didn't do as much as I was hoping. If I hadn't been running everything else, I would have taken the time. But and I do run games on weekends now when there's not conventions. But it was a lot of work. I was honestly worn out at the end of it. A good number of the people who did a lot of the work, especially Lisa Adler-Golden, who was our head of programming. Roger, why am I blanking on Roger's last name, who was assistant head of programming. Sarah Sexton, Robert Markowitz, who was the ATD, and Lilani and Archer. Honestly, those and Mike Rafferty as the con chair were really what put together the framework and built it. There was a lot of other people who came in and did other parts. Morgan Hazelwood took on social media for the con rather than for the organization at that point, and she was instrumental in that as well, and did a number of our training videos we had for participants. People are asking why we didn't switch to Zambia, and the answer to that is we didn't think we had enough time to do the tweaks we would need, because we've done some custom builds in Zambia for Balticon for how we ran things, and we just didn't think. Yes, I'm thinking of Roger Burns. Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, Roger Burns was another one who put a lot of time in. But yeah, people asking why we didn't do Zambia, which is what we've been using. We decided at 57 days that we didn't have enough time to tweak Zambia, get it up and running, and get everything else we needed done. And we didn't have the extra man hours. If we had more volunteers in that time frame that we could slot in and pull in, we could have done it. But we looked at who was actually available at that time with everything that was going on, and decided we just didn't have the manpower for it.
So I think we've heard a number of the points that I've seen lots of nodding heads from the other participants, and obviously a lot of supporting messages that have come from on the chat. If it's okay, I'd like to build by going to Concealant, but we will come back, because I'm also particularly interested, because you in a sense you were one of the first. You were dropped in the deep end. You didn't have very long, and yet you succeeded in putting together a lot of things that others benefited from. Let's build on that, but we'll come back to you, because obviously interested to know what you have learned for future events. But let me shift to Patty and Randall from a Concealant point of view. Obviously a different kind of event, given that Worldcon moves around rather than being in the same city every year, and effectively almost has a new committee every year as well. Had a bit longer, but not that much longer because of the complexity of Worldcon. But can you build on what you've heard both from the previous session and from Matt now, and again, both aspects of it, the kind of like the soft, the people side, as well as the technical.
We came into it fairly cold. Randall was already on the committee, but I was not. And so we wandered in, and initially I was asked to coordinate educational materials because of my background. And that kind of evolved into being more or less project managers. In the note you sent us, you talked about what did you plan? And coming in when we did, we really planned very little because much had already been decided and was being tried out, and the Fantasy Network was all on board for Discord. The first thing that I wanted to mention was something that builds on what Kelly said earlier, that with WorldCons, we put so much effort into them, and the folks in New Zealand had been planning this for literally 10 years. I come from being a psychiatric social worker to begin with, and it struck me how very much like the crisis counseling it was, because everybody was going, oh my God, we planned this all these years, and now we have to do something completely different in 4 months. And a couple of the things that I use as a crisis counselor, because I still do it as a volunteer, is that you need to understand that people are not necessarily talking to each other, they're talking past each other. They're worried, they're stressed out, they're freaked out. And the first thing you have to do is do a little bit of if you're in a meeting or after a meeting, now, did you understand that? This person is saying that we need to talk about this. And that was a very big deal because nobody quite knew what they were doing. There were plans underway, but everyone was so worried about it. And you speak slowly and repeat yourself. Seriously. If you're making a big change, speak more slowly and repeat things and back them up in emails. We couldn't solve a ton of the communications problems, but we primarily looked for things that weren't getting done as project managers. We read everything we could and went, oh, there is a hole here, nobody is doing this. And tried to figure out who was supposed to be doing it. And sometimes the jobs were different enough that nobody knew who was supposed to be doing it. So that's the first piece of it. Randy, I don't want to talk too much.
Well, yeah, just to build on a little bit about the meetings. I don't like meetings. I don't think Patty likes meetings any more than I do. And on the 4 months and a bit I worked on that, I'd done more meetings on Con Zealand than any other con I've ever worked on, by a significant margin. But that said, that was part of the process, is we had to take the time to do those meetings and meet with individuals on their own, and then the heads of different divisions, to make sure that they were being heard, and that, as Patty said, to make sure everybody understands each other here. And with the big divisions, regularly touching base with them, and then just had weekly meetings to make sure we were on course, and quickly able to absorb if something didn't get done, or if there was a change in the winds or something had to be changed. All that came from those meetings. So though I hated them, they had to be done. And actually probably one of the only failings, that's bragging a little bit too much. One of the failings I would certainly admit to is we probably didn't do enough meetings, because stitching everything together really required a whole lot of time with the big tent poles of exhibits and programming and tech. And some of the other divisions we didn't talk to enough and get enough input from. So that would be a bit of advice, that no area is too small, and really you've got to find some way to make time, although we were really loaded. Time was beyond a premium. It was another one of those cases. It's a good thing I'm self-employed, and that, Patty was trapped at home. We were all COVID locked in mostly, that we could put in the number of hours to do. And then other people on the committee could do the hours. The tech team, Maisel and Z-Bang, did extraordinary number of hours.
Yeah. And of course, you both had a very different time zone basis from Wellington as well.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Yeah. The global time zone created, well, I guess it made it possible to spread the meetings out a bit more, but we were meeting with people literally from around the globe, you know, Europe, all over the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Japan. And, yeah.
So again, just kind of stepping through the timeline, you know, the original discussions and decisions were made back in the spring, and then you were both brought on board to help oversee and to project manage, you know, well, the title of your job, the platform. So talk us through that, and you know, again, you know, what is it that you wanted to do, and how did it actually go?
Part of it went very well. Part of it was communicating between tech and the Fantasy Network and the other divisions, because there are a couple of weaknesses that I think we have. And in the gentlest possible way, there are a whole bunch of us that don't understand tech. We do not understand it. There were times we had to say to people that this was the craziest thing that was said to me. I feel like tech is trying to take over the convention. And I said, well, considering that it's all going to be on a technical platform, that's kind of what's happening. But you say that in a bad way instead of coming in and saving the convention way, you know, and looking at that. So it was communications there. And there's always been in world cons and my local cons some tension between tech and the rest of the committee, because people don't understand tech. Tech doesn't always know how to communicate with people who don't understand tech, because some of us are idiots. And I'm perfectly willing to put me in the idiot stage on some things. But also it takes up a big amount of budget because it needs to. So that was one piece. The second piece is going on in chat where, for me, where Marie is talking about her and Morgan as doing training with Discord. Because the big, huge thing, and thank you to the Matts and Morgan, as well as Marie. The other thing was that our group, our fans, you have to know your audience. They didn't know Discord at this point. Program was off training the program participants and did a fantastic job. But it turned out we needed our own trainers, and Morgan and Marie filled that job. We also worked with the Fantasy Network, and it ended up that I needed writers to go through and write Discord stuff. And I worked with someone from somewhere around the world who wrote the best Discord training, and I still have no idea where that woman came from. So some of that worked pretty well. We knew we needed education. We didn't just need to train the techies and the staff, because our people didn't understand Discord. Morgan and Marie were running training for the attendees. And as Marie said, that was a completely new thing. So that was a big piece of my stuff, was trying to get the training coordinated between Fantasy Network programming, people who came in from outside, and make it look at least somewhat consistent.
And before I'll forget this, if we go on, I know some people said so in the chat, but a big thanks to Matt Shogren, because they were super generous with sharing the Balticon experience. And I know some of our program people got to be Zoom hosts. We kind of reached the decision that we were going to use Zoom, but in our meetings with the tech, it was, hey, Matt Shogren's doing all this at Balticon. He's going to come over and help out and share his experience. And boy, was that valuable, you know.
Yes.
Thank goodness. You know, Kelly, if you were looking for another hero award to hand out.
Was it Morgan who helped you write the Discord training?
Morgan helped with doing the training, but what happened was that the Fantasy Network was supposed to be writing the Discord document, and they got pulled into helping to cover the protests in the Northwest because people were getting arrested up here right and left. So in the end, by the time I knew I wasn't going to get it from the Fantasy Network, Morgan and Marie were already doing some training, and we ended up pulling in a writer who could, two writers who could work with the Fantasy Network writer.
Ah, cool.
Interesting.
No, it was a lot of people, and that's the thing. You pull in help and you thank them profusely.
Let me now move to Ginny and to World Fantasy 2020. In some ways similar to WorldCon in being a convention that moves around, but different in a number of ways as well, being a much more officially professional convention, and of course famously having the board, which acts as a continuity and has its own distinct slant to things.
Oh my gosh, the board. I didn't know I was going to be asked to talk about the board, but you're right. The board is a big deal.
Yeah, just for context, of course. But
yeah, exactly. No, and I think all of this audience recognizes that World Fantasy is a little bit different than the regular genre convention. But first of all, I wanted to say, Matthew, Balticon was the first virtual event I attended. So thank you. And Con Zealand, you guys set the standard. I mean, we were totally there. We were all watching you guys because, we were coming up soon. And Matthew said his job was to convince everybody that they could go virtual. I got to tell you, I think the biggest job we had was convincing me that we had to go virtual. Because remember, I was not a con runner, and it took one heck of a lot of work and convincing to get to the point of hosting even an in-person convention, and then pivoting my thinking to think we could go virtual. That was just not easy. The thing is, when I first bid for World Fantasy, I really did have an agenda. I mean, David Hartwell invited me to do it, and I love the convention. I do. I love the professionalism of this organization. But I also had kind of and if any of my, fellow board members are watching, sorry about this, but, it's an aging organization. And I kind of was thinking, you know what, if we don't start opening up to younger people, we're going to age out. And, I don't want to see that, because I love the professionalism of this convention. So when I first got involved, one of my goals was I want to get a younger group involved. So me not being a con runner, having no experience whatsoever, and my goal being to engage a younger audience, which Salt Lake City, we have a bunch of universities right there within that area. So I set out and started recruiting from universities, from BYU, from the University of Utah, from Weber State, from Utah State. So I built this team when we were going to be in person with all these young people, people who were creative writing, majors and artists. And, it's like, yeah, we're going to get these people involved. And my pitch to them was, you can come in, you can schmooze with all these people, you can serve them sandwiches in the hospitality suite, you can hold up a 10-minute sign, it's not that big a deal, and look who you get to, what you get to see. And then the COVID happened. So my team was not only not tech savvy, they weren't con savvy, and neither was I. And so, you know, here we are. We've got this worldwide convention and we are running it, and we've got amazing guests of honor that are, you know, world renowned and all this. And my deepest desire was to honor David Cherry and Stephen Gallagher and CJ Cherry and Ann Grohl, you know, and all these people. I mean, I just really wanted to honor them. And then we go virtual, and none of us knew what the heck we were doing. We really didn't. And so not only were we not tech savvy, we had no convention experience whatsoever. So when, and I gotta say, and I will say this,
Let me interrupt, please.
I'm broadcasting right now.
Okay, it's not cooking.
One of my biggest challenges, I think, and one of the biggest failures that I will say I had is, here I am, I'm leading this convention with all of these people that don't have, you know, any experience whatsoever. And we, you know, the COVID hits and people are talking about, do we need to switch to a virtual? And I think, you know, my only leadership experience in the past prior to this was as a corporate director, which was, I think, probably part of the reason the World Fantasy Board gave me the convention, was because I did have leadership experience. But, you know, the thing is, you try to present a positive outlook no matter what. And one of my biggest pieces of advice to any con runner that finds themselves in this situation is absolutely be transparent with your committee. Because I remember some of you all, Patty, you and me, Randall, you and me, maybe even Matthew, we were on a Zoom meeting like in April or May called Crisis in Leadership or something like that. And I kept saying, we are going physical. We are not canceling. And I kept pushing this out and pushing this out. And it was because even in the back of my mind, obviously we're knowing what the heck is going on, but we didn't know what the extent was at that point. And I kept saying, you know, because I wanted to present a positive aspect, I kept saying, we are not canceling. Come to Salt Lake City. We are going to have a physical convention. Because maybe I didn't want to admit it to myself, or maybe I just wanted to present like this, you know, this positive leadership attitude and all that. But I got to tell you, that was wrong. It was absolutely wrong. It might be the right attitude to present to the public. It's not the right attitude to present to your committee who know better. And I lost a couple of really, really good committee members because at that time, because I was not publicly expressing what I was going through privately, you know, trying to convince hotels and so on and so forth that, you know, we couldn't do this. And I actually, at one point, it was really rough. At one point, one of my committee members that I just absolutely loved, she was amazing. She didn't have a lot of experience in con running, but she was an amazing person. And she emailed me privately and said, Ginny, you care more about money than you care about people. That killed me. That killed me. And so I guess one of my biggest early learnings is be transparent. None of us know what's going to happen. And you know what? That's okay. You don't have to know. What you have to do is you have to be honest and transparent with people, and then they'll stick with you. And I could never convince her to come back, and that's my loss. That's my loss. And I lost two of them that way. So that's one. The second thing that happened was, here I am, you know, we're going now at this point, my hotel finally has canceled their contract and gave me my money back. Yay. And so here we are. And that was a big deal, because I got to tell you, our hotel contract obligation was over $250,000. And we had about $6,000 in our checking account at that point. So, I mean, it wasn't insignificant. It wasn't that I was, you know, and that's why I think that criticism also hit me personally, because the financial aspect was a huge ordeal for me. I mean, it really was. not that it was me personally, it's the nonprofit that, you know, is sponsoring us, but I felt personally liable and responsible. And so that was a huge deal. So when they finally said, okay, you know, we will grant your request, and they, you know, enacted force majeure and gave us our deposit back, that was pretty amazing. So then we have to pivot. And now here I have this committee that I have put together from these young people. I mean, we had a few people who had convention experience, but most of my committee were young people who had never done anything on a convention whatsoever and were just there so they could meet the pros. Seriously. And now we're pivoting. And I had never had any experience whatsoever. So now I start going to Matthew's convention and Patty's convention and trying to figure out what the heck is going on. So what we decided to do after watching them and watching what they did is I put together among my committee. The really cool thing is all these young people that had no experience in convention running, they're technical. They're more technical than I am. They knew what they were doing. And so I had this pool of people who were like ready to jump in. They really were. So I put together a virtual task force. And the one thing, I mean, here's the thing with WorldCon, with a lot of the conventions, I know you all have individual committees, but you also have, WorldCon has the, the voting where you have platforms that go from committee to committee. World Fantasy doesn't have that. It really is, we're on our own. Didn't even share contacts from one year to another, publisher contacts. I mean, it's like we're totally on our own because they're all, individual, and the board provides oversight for consistency purposes, but they don't provide oversight for actual running of the convention. And so here we are, and we got nothing, but I got these young people who know what they're doing. So I put together a task force, and we went out and started looking at platforms. And I spent a lot of time with the Fantasy Network and going through all of their tech training. And I got into the what was the first convention the Fantasy Network did?
ZoeCon.
ZoeCon. Yeah. So I got into that. And I learned Discord and all that. And, the more I learned about it, the more I realized that the World Fantasy membership just was not ready for Discord. And if you took away Discord, I really wanted to work with the Fantasy Network. If you took away Discord, I really couldn't justify the expense. And so we ended up, I put together a task force. They looked at tons of different online softwares. We looked at Grenadine. We looked at a bunch, but here's the thing. In mind, we always had the fact that we are running this convention and we are a one and done. This committee will never work together again. We're not like most of the people that are watching this. We are not con runners. We are a one and done because we love the World Fantasy Convention and we want to do a good job this year. And so we ended up licensing a software called Crowd Compass from a company called Cvent. We looked at dozens and we evaluated them all. And I love this. I would show it to you guys if I could share my screen, but it's probably not necessary. The thing we loved about it is, number one, it is so intuitive and easy to navigate and easy to set up. And they have 24/7 support, which is amazing. I mean, really amazing. They are right there with every question you have. They're just right there 24/7 the whole time. We absolutely loved it. And it was super easy to set up. We did not do Discord. And that was a big discussion because you guys before us had done Discord. And so we knew that some portion of our attendees were going to be expecting a Discord-like experience, and we did not have that. We started setting up our online platform. It took us a while. We announced that we were going virtual June 1st. We didn't decide on Crowd Compass and start setting up until early September. And we went live October 28th. So it sounds like we had a lot of time. We really did not, because we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the heck are we doing. Because remember, we had no experience. We had none. So we did that. And I got to tell you, I honestly, I would love to share, I don't know if this is the time, the lessons that I learned about.
Absolutely.
Okay, all right, good. Lessons learned. Let me tell you, first and foremost, going virtual presented us with a really unique opportunity. We are the World Fantasy Convention, but we typically are in North America and then occasionally in Europe. But we keep saying we're the World Fantasy Convention. Well, going virtual actually gave us an opportunity to really go worldwide. So we ended up having people panelists from 19 different countries. We had people participating from China and Australia and Pakistan and just all over the world. And I know you guys are accustomed to that, but we aren't. And so it gave us so many unique opportunities. First of all, we could expand. The World Fantasy Convention schedule usually runs from 10 in the morning until like 4 or 5 in the afternoon. And then you've got all these parties and receptions and all this stuff. Well, we couldn't do that. So we ran our schedule in order to accommodate worldwide participation. We ran it all the way up until, like 10 o'clock at night and beyond. We had honestly an amazing, diverse population of people that were participating from all over the world. It was awesome. And I know Diane is one of our, I know she's on here because I saw her name earlier, but we've talked about this because Diane is the chair of next year's World Fantasy Convention. I think we set a standard for participation for a worldwide convention that is going to have to be carried on in the future. Somebody in one of the previous sessions that I saw earlier said, if you're not offering a virtual element in the future, you're going to have to answer to why. And I really think that's true. And I think with World Fantasy Convention, we really, really set that standard. It was amazing. I just can't even tell you. Like I said earlier, my second thing that I would say is be transparent with your committee. I lost people because I was trying to project as a con runner an air of confidence and not, they mistook that confidence for stubbornness or even heartlessness, which was not true. But if that's what I projected, that's what they perceived. And that's one of my big learnings. Another learning I have is tech is vital. Tech is vital. I'm telling you, I had no idea. We can license Zoom. I can do Zoom meetings here and there. I had no clue what a good tech support team would do. The best day of my life was when Janie Shea joined my team. And then I got a guy named, the second best was when Odin Halverson joined my team, and he had just come off running the Nebulas. He was amazing. I had like 5 incredibly talented tech people who took over because they knew they could sense very quickly that I didn't know what the heck I was doing, and they took over, and I gave them the ability to do that. That is so important. And then I guess one of the things that I really learned is I had this whole thing, because I'm a very structured person. So, when we pivot to virtual, I laid it all out. I knew exactly what the schedule was. I knew exactly what our Zoom meetings were. We had 281, I think, different Zoom sessions. 98 of them were panel discussions, and the rest were readings. And we had this elaborate schedule of who was going to be the Zoom host and who was going to be, the backup host, and how we're going to access everybody. And we had, and this is the key, I had 12 different, of course, we only had 257 attendees. You all have a lot more than that, but I had a very specific schedule for this reading will take place at 2 o'clock. We'll end at 2:25. The next one will start at 3 o'clock and we'll end at 3, you know, whatever. And this person is in charge of this one. This was, I mean, very, very, very logical. And we set up a Zoom session for everyone. And what we found on the first day was readings don't end exactly when you want them to, when there's not people like waiting to come into the room. So, you know, like physically into the room and opening the door and kicking you out. So what happened was the people that are in reading number 1, reading number 2's host got really excited and would end the previous reading. So it was chaos. And this was day 1. Day 2, my tech team came to me and said, and honestly, this is Odin and a lady named Heather Jones, who is, you know, my favorite person in the world, second favorite to Janie. They came to me and they said, this is not working. It's chaotic. We got to do something. And we pivoted mid-convention, which I know you're not supposed to do. I know that is totally taboo, but it wasn't working. And so literally day 2 of the convention, we shut down all of the reading meetings and created what you all have as a con suite with multiple breakout rooms. And we posted that everywhere, all over the Crowd Compass app, everywhere. And all of the readings would then, people would come in and we had hosts that were there 24/7 who would send them into a breakout room. It was the best move of the entire convention, not only because it put structure to the readings, but because people would come into that breakout room like they are this con suite and hang out. And that's what they were missing. And we did not have that opportunity anywhere else because we hadn't done Discord. There was no place for people to just get together and hang out. And they loved it. I'm telling you, I still get emails from people saying, oh, what do we called it, the bar and patio. The bar and patio was the best thing in the world. It was totally on the fly on Thursday morning. Crazy. So that would be my biggest recommendation is anticipate the need for people in a virtual convention to have a physical interaction and provide them an area to do that. Because I did not do that until midway through my convention. And that was the biggest success that we had.
Okay. That's great.
I'm sorry.
No. I mean, we deliberately designed this as a 90-minute session rather than 60 to give you all the chance to really talk through. What I'd like to do is get from Matt and Patty and Randall, again, just as you just did, you kind of like the main takeaways and things you would take forward, and then open out. I see a lot of discussion. Actually, not so much questions, but support and recognition, but there will be some questions as well. But let me just go back to Matt and then to Patty and Randall, just for your conclusions and recommendations, and then we'll open it up to questions and we'll just see how the time goes. So Matt, back to you.
Yeah, so I think my biggest takeaway was getting the right from Balticon and then the conventions I worked after, which honestly I think a couple of the ones after didn't learn as well as from Balticon as they could have, is you look at what volunteers you have, size things to the volunteers you have, and you can do an amazing job. If you try and take more and assume we'll find magical volunteers, they don't exist. They won't necessarily exist. There are a lot of people out there. It takes a lot of people to run an online convention. It takes a lot more people to run an online convention. And now we're talking about hybrid conventions in the future. And that's taking even more people. So my biggest takeaway is you got to find the right volunteers. You got to be willing to train volunteers, and you got to support the volunteers that you brought in and communicate very well with them, both through training and discussions, and let them know about updates.
And yeah, just to take one question that has come in the meantime, and I'll bring it back to the others as well. This questions of the costs of virtual versus in-person conventions. And of course, there's been a lot of learning this year as well about that, and decisions that have been made in advance because you don't know in advance. But from your point of view, any comments on the costs, and what should we what should we learn from that and take forward?
So the biggest things cost-wise, our biggest single expense was in fact our Second Life platform, which was something that we had somebody donate the money to do. So it's our biggest expense, but somebody donated the money for it. So it's not like it actually came out of our budget. But price-wise, as a platform, we had about 1,700 people through Zoom meetings, about 1,000 through our Discord, and about 400 on Second Life. And the people on Second Life were very much enjoyed it, but it didn't really tie well in with the rest of the con, so it kind of almost was its own side con. If you're not going to do something like that, cost-wise, the biggest costs are Zoom. If you can get volunteers, you don't need to spend the money on somebody, and you don't need to spend the money on somebody coming in and setting a Discord for you. Boosting Discord is cheap for a month or two, but it's still a cost. The next big thing is that it was later conventions. Balticon looked at it, and the options that were out there when Balticon looked at it for closed captioning just were too expensive for Balticon. Rev came out later with their per account per month fee instead of per minute fee, which is what Rev has now. And it's gone for doing the same thing we did at Balticon with, if we did Rev now, would have been only $200 instead of, we were quoted over $15,000 for it when Balticon happened. So the prices on closed caption are coming down a lot, so it's starting to become a more possible item. Rev, though, has had, in the past 3 conventions we've used it, we've had glitches at 2 of the 3. So, they're cheaper, but they're not quite as reliable. But when they're working, they're actually one of the better ones when they're working. And so biggest expenses going online, closed caption if you're going to do it, and then whatever platform you choose. And then something to tie them all together. That's the thing that a lot of conventions still don't have. I'm working on, the next convention I'm working on is currently looking at using GatherTown to pull everything together. It's come a long way in the last 9 months. Honestly, it was in beta when Balticon happened last year. It is still, I would honestly, where it is now is pretty good, and it's kind of expensive for what it is, but there's nothing out there that's not 10 times as expensive for what it is too. So,
okay.
But yeah, those are your big expenses.
Yeah, and I recognize some of the points that you made. They come up in the, I have to say, very rich chat. I'm probably missing a bunch of questions there. But let me come back to Patty and Randall as well, both from the point of view of main takeaways, but also anything that you might say regarding the the points that have been raised around decisions relating to cost and to technology, etc. But whichever way you want to go is good.
Okay. Well, let me just tag on to something Matt says, because he was talking about cost and the platforms. We had professional Zoom licenses and sufficient number to do everything, and that was affordable. But DisCon has had, of course, some virtual discussions going on. I think it was Rick Kowalczyk that made the point in the recent past that if you're doing the hybrid and you're live and in person in a facility, when you go to that facility to try to get internet pipe going out, that can end up being quite expensive depending on where you are, versus if you're completely virtual and you're not really having to hire internet from somebody. So that's a factor in this virtualization, is what's the cost going to be to run really good internet into your facility. takeaways going forward. I think when Patty and I started the job, there's no people said we needed another 2 months to do it. That's true. We made it happen, but it really could have, used another 2 months, and starting well in advance. There's just, for instance, if you have an exhibit hall, you're going to have shelves and tables and display cases and stuff you're going to set up a few days in advance. Well, if you go virtual, the exhibit hall's got to be set up weeks in advance. There's no grab a few extra hands. And I think Patty made the comment during our work on Conzealand about you can't just run down to the gopher hole and grab a volunteer. They've got to all be there and in place, and each room's demanding a volunteer versus somebody walking in and doing the 5-minute sign and can hit a bunch of rooms. You're required to have somebody in every room for the whole meeting. Lorraine Clark, I saw way upstream, made a note about the skill set changes that, getting someone for Reg in person versus getting someone for Reg and dealing it all online is different. Yeah, I see her. She's pulling her head out. You might unmute her in a moment and let her make a comment on that. So it was more volunteers and different skill sets for the volunteers. I mean, just can be completely different. If I'm doing it this way, I need A's. The other way, I need B's. And I'll shut up. Patty, do you want to?
Well, you made one of my points, and that you just can't grab someone to take your 5-minute sign in or sit being a door dragon at a door. So if you're going to make the decision to do this, you're looking at the cost if you're trying to do a hybrid, because right now I work on a con that gets their internet more or less for free through our contract. I know for a fact right now that will never happen again because so many people doing a virtual piece of conventions. So that's going to be a piece we have to look at. But it was so good when I attended Balticon. I'm a lurker at filking because I can't sing, but I like music. And it was so good to hear all of your other filkers I'd never heard before. And what Jenny said about getting people from around the world. So going through what do the platforms cost, how many tech volunteers you have in your group, how many volunteers, so how many program rooms can you run, whether you're going to try and tie things together, all of that is a big deal. And I think if I were starting another convention, and this is the advice for everybody, is that I was in the con suite earlier, and much of it was Kathy Overton was mentioning things we hadn't been discussing in new platforms, and that we should be discussing that because people are going to be looking for things. We need to all become just enough more techy that us as general managers can get in with the techies and say something like my educational background of, yeah, we can train people to do this, but ooh, this one, failure rate too high. Most fans are going to look at it and scream and walk away. So I think all of the con runners out here should be going and exploring more of this stuff.
Okay, can I totally agree with Patty. Absolutely agree with Patty. I also want to react to something I see in the chat from Michael. One of the problem with virtual cons is the possibility of losing the interest of old school volunteers, the ones that hauled the equipment. Okay, I have a story about that. I don't know if he's here or not, but one of the people that was involved in my committee from the very beginning is Chris Marble. And Chris is amazing. Many of you probably know him. He's been he's a staple at a lot of conventions. And when we pivoted to virtual, Chris was on my committee. He was going to be my doc master. And when we pivoted to virtual, he contacted me and he said, I don't think I have anything to add. And I'm like, Chris, yes, you are not backing out. I'm not letting you out of your commitment. If nothing else, you can help us test. You can help us test whatever solution we have. Chris turned out, he ended up, I mean, he pivoted to being a Zoom host, and he went to every single training we had, and we had a ton of trainings for our Zoom hosts. Every single training, he was hysterical, he was funny, he brought like this unique characteristic to every single meeting he went to. Ended up being so good that my Odin, the tech team guy that came onto my committee, stole him from the Zoom host position and put him on tech team. He was amazing. He was amazing, but he didn't think he had any place in a virtual convention. So I'm telling you, I mean, I absolutely, Michael, I hear what you're saying, but there is a place for everybody. If nothing else, if absolutely nothing else, we need to tell these people, you know what, we're going to be putting on something that a lot of people don't have any experience with. You can help us test it. That's my husband's role. He's so not technical. But if I can train him, I can train anybody, right? You know, Chris is a success. Chris was one of our stars, really. About cost, I'm sorry, I totally sidetracked that. About cost, we ended up with, of course, you know, we're smaller. Frankly, we were hoping, my break-even point was 320 members online. We ended up with 547, and I kept having to add Zoom licenses because it was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So we ended up with 12 pro licenses, and we had 500 webinars and 1,000 webinar, so that we could do the opening ceremonies and the closing the World Fantasy Awards. So it was like $1,600 a month, and Crowd Compass was like $3,600. So yeah, Zoom was the biggest expense, but we had a fabulous Zoom customer service customer representative, and he was more conscious of my money than I was. And so, you know, he says, okay, now we're going to license this and this on this date, and then you'll add this on this date, and then you'll add this on this date, and then we're going to shut it all down on this date. He really saved me a lot of money. So yes, it was the biggest expense, but I think it was money well spent, and it was, we didn't spend anything we didn't need to. I really believe that. So
let me try and pick out a few kind of themes that came from what you've all said and also have popped up in the chat. And just bear with me, maybe just a few minutes to try and draw those out, because we'll then have maybe 5 or 10 minutes to kind of close out and think about what next. You know, and the return to physical face-to-face, if as and when that happens. So there's clearly something around the shock of the change hitting our assumptions, our, you know, decades-long culture of doing things a certain way. You know, that includes, you know, everybody participates, everybody volunteers. You know, nobody does it for free. But of course, that also hid things that we took for granted. We took for granted that we paid for hotels and everything that came from hotels. There's new stuff that we're having to learn, that we're having to pay for because it's new. That takes time to incorporate, to understand, to make it the way that we do things around here. That there are specific elements that relate to that in terms of, I mean, you've all talked about volunteers, the pivoting of, you know, people who've either been spending, you know, years or decades or even months with a certain expectation of an event having to change. So there's the emotional turnaround needed to support that, in addition to the regular support you need to give to basically an all-volunteer organization, or an organization with a mix of volunteers and professionals, which can create its own tensions as well. I saw in the chat, you know, we had the cost issue, and clearly we're still figuring that out, and the big companies are responding to that as well. You know, whether they are the, you know, like global companies like Zoom, but also not forgetting the ones where we've had, you know, such as Grenadine, for instance, where we've had a lot of hand-to-hand handcrafting together with them to make something that we need, but that was also commercially useful to them. And then there's been quite a lot of conversation about some specific elements, such as, and this is quite topical in last year, of course, the trials and tribulations of captioning, auto captioning versus computer aided captioning, you know, carts, but involving people, versus full-time translation, each of them with certain cost implications. Associated with that, of course, also the diversity and inclusion element, which is, you know, making things accessible to people. You know, having captioning is helpful there, because with sign language, of course, you then have a, you know, you've got American Sign Language, British Sign Language, Finnish Sign Language. There is no international sign language yet. And then I guess coming back to the cultural element as well, and what is it that we're missing? What voices are we missing? It was quite striking, both in the previous panel, there was a mention of Cheryl Morgan's article that she wrote reflecting on, you know, the very rapid cultural changes affecting the WorldCon and the Hugos in particular. Another event that pivoted, or actually was created virtually this year, was FIACon. And, you know, there's a very interesting article by the lead there, LD Lewis, about FIACon. Again, from the perspective of a BIPOC-focused convention, and what can we learn from that, from what is, you know, like this convention and the others is a very, you know, white Western set of cultural assumptions. There's a lot of useful things out there that we can learn from, but, you know, it takes time. And I think, you know, with the shot, we're never so good as we are as in a crisis, and you should never waste a crisis. But it also takes time to learn from it and make it part of your new normal. So I thought that was just a bit of a kind of synthesis of some of the themes that were coming out. Let me now push it back to you. And I don't think there are specific questions I want to address. Yeah, people can raise their hand in webinar, but with say 10 minutes left, I also want to give you a chance to talk about, you know, what's next. How will it go? Because of course the con suite, the virtual con suite, will be open after this. This is the last formal panel, and of course you can all go over there. I'm sure you'll get lots of virtual drinks and continue the conversation. And this is recorded, as are the other sessions, so people can build on it as well. So let me just go back around to all of you and just ask, you know, final comment. As you think about what happens next, what do you think that's going to look like, and what do we need to look out for? What do we need to watch out for? So who would like to go first? This will be your final official comment, as it were.
As to what happens next, and I know Diane Lacey, who is the next chair of World Fantasy, I think I saw her name on the participant list earlier, so I know she's listening. And Terry Fong is the vice chair of next year. What happens next is exactly what I heard someone say in one of the previous sessions today is, if you don't have, I don't care what happens with COVID and whether or not we can do in-person events. If you have an in-person event and you don't have a virtual component to that, you need to answer the question, why not? I think the virtual conventions have opened our conventions up to the world. And I think our conventions and the topics and the discussions that are happening there are so much richer and more full and so much more amazing and enlightening than before then. So I think that's something that a virtual convention has done, is I think it changes the face of what we look like from now on. What do you think, Patty?
Yeah.
Do you agree, Patty?
We were all waiting politely for Vince. The truth is that I agree with everything Jenny said. We're going to have to educate ourselves on all of the costs, hotel, internet, platforms, captioning, on what can be done for various sizes of conventions. And we're futurists. Somebody said that way earlier. we're futurists. We should be able to educate ourselves no matter what age we are. And we have the people to help do it, not just the techno fandom, but here in Portland, the people who have adapted the best are our filters. I don't think I go by a week where I don't get an invitation from some old friends of mine to a Filk concert or a Filk convention being held in Germany or someplace I've never heard of. And Jenny's right. I've heard some of the best music I've ever heard. So go out and find out more. We should next year, and I didn't say this, this again came from lurking in the con suite. If we don't have more technical stuff on platforms next year at SMOFCon, we're probably kind of failing our brief as con runners.
I would agree with that completely. And I think just to second Jenny's, if we don't answer the question why we don't have a virtual element, and it's not just the, oh, it was I couldn't afford to travel, so it wasn't that nice, I could come in virtually. But from ZoeCon, which was really one of the first stabs at doing this, and it was Discord related, there were several different comments that really struck me. One was from a person who had social anxiety about going to a big in-person convention, but loved that they could participate virtually. And another one was even some people with access issues, given the option of, well, do I want to fight through the access issues in a real world setting, or can I take advantage of the virtual options? So that just layers in more reasons that there needs to be some virtual element. So. But you got to have the volunteers and the training to do it all. So.
Yeah.
Money and the money, because honestly, I mean, I looked at this. A hybrid event is twice the expense of an in-person event or a virtual event, because you got to do both. So and that's a big deal. It really is.
It is. I think part of what we're going to have to be doing going forward is trying to find sponsors to help sponsor some of that. So we are going to need to be doing hybrid. I currently have worked out how to do 4 rooms hybrid for Balticon at the moment, of the 22 that we're doing. And between the bandwidth in the hotel, and I actually have a load balancing router with cell data to help with that. But even because the hotel won't sell us over a certain amount of data apparently. So combining those two, we really only have the bandwidth. We could actually probably stretch it to 5 rooms, but you don't want to be planning on maxing out your bandwidth that way. So we really only have the bandwidth safely to run for at the moment. But we have figured out a plan for that. And we set up a demo on my deck in the backyard a little while ago. But I have gigabit Ethernet at home, which is so much better than what we have at the hotel. I think going forward, the big thing is we're gonna need to be recruiting volunteers, younger volunteers to help run. We need volunteers who are actually running our online stuff who aren't on site as well.
Right.
So even when you're doing it in person, we need some of those volunteers out there in cyberspace helping that aren't going to be at the convention center. So if the internet goes out at the convention center, there's still somebody involved in that. And so we're going to have to do a lot of recruiting, a lot of finding people who are interested and working together on making sure people get trained. And we're going to need the in-person techs. We're going to need the online techs. We're going to need the techs on site that are good at doing both. So we're going to end up tripling or quadrupling the techs volunteer needs to go hybrid for each room that goes hybrid. Most conventions, you have a couple of big rooms with lights and whatnot that, they're main stage type setups. And then you have the breakout rooms. Breakout rooms, usually it's 1 tech per 3, 4, 5 10 breakout rooms. It's going to be 3-4 techs per breakout room at this point. So it's just going forward, we're going to need to do it, but we're going to need to find the volunteers. So if any of you who, well, if you're at SMOFCon, you probably volunteer for stuff anyway. But if you're used to volunteering in other departments, think about talking with tech and doing some hours with them as well. Think about volunteering at places you wouldn't otherwise do. I think a lot of conventions that charge their volunteers to come and work the con are going to have to look at that, because that reduces the number of volunteers. And if we're going to need a whole bunch of extra volunteers, we're probably going to have to look at that, at doing and making, people pay to come and volunteer, because a lot of the people who have the skills are of the generation that got hit by the 2018 crash and now the COVID crash and don't have the spare cash to pay to come to volunteer for a weekend.
Yeah, so you just like drove the knife into my heart on that topic, which we could do like a whole hour on. But one thing I know, sorry, one thing I absolutely want to emphasize is he is absolutely right about having backup for internet services. And these are these things when you pivot to a virtual convention at the last minute you don't think of. Janie helped me understand, okay, we need to train people with every single Zoom meeting. The host has to assign a co-host, because if the host internet goes down, the meeting goes down. And that's like a microscopic view of literally the entire convention. What happens if it goes down? That is, backup plans in an in-person convention. You don't have to think about that. You think about if somebody gets sick, so and so will take over. But what happens in a virtual convention if the internet goes down?
So
what is your backup plan?
Hold that thought. Hold that thought, because you're absolutely right. Any one of these topics could be another hour, and probably they will be. We are out of time, but let me thank you all. It was really interesting, especially the connections between you. Great conversation on the chat. As we said, both this session and the chat are recorded. I think they're going on to the SMOFCon YouTube channel. This is the final formal session. We will let the virtual consuite still open. I'm sure you will be very welcome there. But again, just thank all of you. That was great. And let's see what happens next.